Good afternoon and welcome everybody to today's webinar, Blueprints for Quality Dementia Support, Creating Sustainable Models of Care. My name's Gary O'Toole. I'm the National Consultancy Lead at Dementia Australia. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and to pay my respect to elders past and present and to our shared futures together. Just a couple of quick housekeeping points. Your microphones are muted just to ensure that we have good sound quality. If you've got any questions for our panelists, please just add them to the question and answer box on your right. You can upvote questions if you like them, and that will raise the questions to the top of our list. Most popular questions we'll be able to put to our speakers as we discuss our topic today. We'll do our best, but we get lots and lots of questions, so I do apologise at the very beginning if we're not able to answer all of your questions. So the topic that we're exploring today is person-centred care. And that goes to the very heart, I think, of what we're all doing in supporting people living with dementia. It's a term that we hear everywhere in aged care. It's in our standards, it's in our policies and procedures, it's in the brochures that we offer to family members, it's in our mission statements. But here's the challenge, I suppose. Are we truly living our person-centred care philosophy, or are we just talking the talk? In Australia, particularly since the Royal Commission, there's been an enormous amount of discussion about the importance of person-centred care. But for many of us on the ground, the dedicated workers within the aged care environment, it often feels like person-centred care is a bit of a fantastic theory, but it struggles, and we struggle under the pressure of short staffing, time constraints, and often task-driven routines. We know that the origins of person-centred care started with the work of the English psychologist Tom Kirkwood in the 1990s. And Kirkwood essentially said that person-centred care, that dementia was not just a brain disease or a disease of the brain. It was an interaction between a person's neurological impairment, the impairment produced by the diseases that lead to dementia, and their social psychology, how they're treated by those around them. What Kirkwood's groundbreaking work did was to shift the focus away from what's wrong with the brain to what is needed for the person. He argued that even with cognitive decline, the person's personhood could be sustained or even enhanced through meaningful relationships built on respect, inclusion, and love, Kirkwood said. The problem for us, I think, as I've hinted, is the gap, the distance between this really central philosophy of support and the really busy environment in the aged care sector. How often can we consistently treat a person as a unique individual when we shift from task to task and the various concerns that we have every day in getting things done? How do we stop person-centred care from just being a tick box item and turn it into an actual blueprint for the way all of our organisations operate? That's the question for today. How do we create a sustainable model of person-centred care? A model that doesn't just rely solely on what are sometimes the heroic efforts of one or two staff members, but that's embedded into the very DNA of our organisations. To help explore this, we've brought together a couple of truly exceptional panelists today. We're still having trouble just getting one of our panelists online, so we'll work with what we've got at the moment. But I'd like to introduce first Lou Doswell. Lou Doswell is one of the facilitators at the Dementia Australia Centre for Dementia Learning. She has extensive experience in consultancy and dementia education and has a real passion for sustainable models of dementia support. So welcome, Lou. Lou, one of the models that we developed at Dementia Australia and many years ago was called the values model. It's one of those ways in which we try and turn the philosophy of person-centered care into something practical and observable. We can see what it is that we do around here to support the personhood of people living with dementia. I'm just wondering if you could provide some specific practical examples of that values model and how it embeds those fundamental person-centered principles.
Thanks, Gary. And it's great to be here to share something that I'm incredibly passionate about, models of care that can actually lead to personhood for individuals, as well as being able to look at yourselves as workers to be able to deliver that practice. So the values model, it's an acronym. So each letter was represented by looking at the person, what we could do to value the person, what was important with their autonomy,
Mm-hmm.
the lived experience, looking at understanding relationships, looking at the environment as well, and then the life experience for the person. So once we broke down those elements, the values model is something that you alluded to is very tangible if you have experiences to this is the way we do things, if you're going to embed that model of care. So for things like valuing, how do we value a resident? What does that look like in practice? And it might be getting to know the person via whatever stream you do, whether it's through the sunflower, getting to know the person through the 5 things about me. And it could be something as simple about their personality, that they loved a sense of humour. That was so important to them. That's what they valued.
Mm-hmm.
So then how do you embed that within the organisation and the daily tasks? So it could be bring that to your daily task of if you're helping someone with their hygiene needs, what does that look like when they're feeling really vulnerable? If there's something that they enjoy, conversation about humour, bringing that into when you're supporting their needs. So it's very individualised and then giving person-centred to that person. We go through and look at each element. Autonomy, it could be for a person, they have always valued the autonomy of freedom,
Yeah.
as most of us do. And as we know, in aged care, it can be difficult someone to express that, but also to embed that. What does freedom look like for that individual?
Mm.
And it might be, well, that person needs to have access to outside because that was their sense of freedom. And then being able to put that in their care plan so that they're documented that it happens on a regular basis. How do we roster that? So once again, they're very tangible ways. It's like having the goal for the person, and then how can we achieve it within our scope of practice? And do we need support from other staff or other families to be able to create autonomy? And as you mentioned, often you can have a great vision of an organisation about creating a values model with all the words, but then how do we actually put it into place? Things like life experiences is a great one when you look at an individual and we look at ourselves of how have we spent our lives, and how do we then create that life once someone is in aged care or in the community and they're dependent on a carer, or even if they're in the acute sector with dementia, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And it might be then looking at that life experience for that person is creating a role. So then that gets embedded. So maybe that person was, a farmer. So then a role for that person would be doing something that might be collecting the eggs from the chook house, or going out and shutting the gates outside the facility. So once again, this is, what does it look like in practice? So that's what the values model does, is really starts to break down each element and then look at that person and say, well, what's important and how do we embed that to that person for that? Yeah.
Look, it's interesting, Lou, isn't it? Because I think often for staff members working every day, one of the things we hear back from them all the time, and I think we'll probably get some questions about it later, is, we have so much to do. We need to support people's hygiene and their nutrition and their physical health and their medical health. And, how do we have time for the sorts of things that you're talking about? And it's something that I've thought about a lot in the past. And I have a nursing background, and my dream, my vision, I suppose, for a truly person-centered care, supported by the values model. We'll talk about the Eden model in a moment. Is, well, yes, I do have a lot of clinical things. I have a lot of lifestyle things. I have a lot of physical supports that I need to provide the person with dementia. But how do they fit with our vision for what a good day for that person looks like? So, if, as you were saying, I want to get out into the garden, well, what support do I need from the nursing staff so that my pain is in control, the personal care staff so that I'm dressed appropriately for the weather? And what we start to see are those everyday tasks that we're performing in aged care become in the service of supporting a good day, rather than being the priority of the work that we're doing every day. Have you got any comments about that?
Absolutely, and it's a challenge and it's difficult, and there's a lot of elements that the sector's up against. So that's a challenge in itself, and it's that shift of, and we'll probably talk about it later when we think about other things about some of the sustainability, but looking at how we do things around here, and that looking at a day in the life of that resident, what does that look like? And breaking the silos down of, well, it's the task that needs to be done, and now it's the time for an activity or the time for some medical intervention, or there might be some family visits, whatever that happens. But how do we actually, when we're doing what's needed, definitely all those things need to be done, but that shift of being able to do it in a way that is very personalized for that person, what is mostly important and how we can do that with still getting that task done is a bit of a shift. And it's the silo breakdown that often can help within organizations of communicating with staff. Well, we need to do this for that person. That's important. How
Mm.
we can work together. But definitely being able to have that anchor and that foundation of, from the organization, of this is the way we do things, and you've got some real great foundations of being able to work with to go forward. And I think that sort of can be a challenge, but if you've got that there platform, then often you will find staff will then work together to get to that end goal for that personhood for that person.
Absolutely. And I love that phrase you use. This is the way we do things around here. And it's I think one phrase that talks about that embedding into the expectations of the organization around what the work of aged care is. And it's about supporting somebody to have a good day, to be able to connect and stay connected to what's important to them. I'm sure we.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, sorry, I
Mm.
think it's that outcome, and it often that's becomes a bit blurred, and the outcome might be, for that person to be dressed and to be ready for something because maybe there's pressure from family or
Yeah.
something else. So it's re-looking at, well, what is the outcome for that individual? Is it that they're just able to sit outside and feel as though they've got that sense of freedom, which is probably the better outcome than what we often perceive it is. So if looking for that, and that takes a little bit of digging deep in and really going into that arena where it could be a little bit uncomfortable to find out what is important to that person and how do we achieve that.
It's sort of creating that network of support, isn't it? It's family and staff and the people who are helping with the gardening and the volunteers, as well as management and the person at the front desk. We all have a role in supporting people with dementia to have purpose and meaning. Look, thanks, Lou. I'm sure we'll be revisiting a lot of these topics again. I'd like to introduce Sally Hopkins, and thank you, Sally, for popping in. I know you're on your phone at the moment, so we won't be able to see you. But Sally Hopkins is the Executive Director at Eden on Oz in New Zealand. She's a leader and has been for many years now in cultural change and organisational transformation or support practice transformation. And like Lou, she shares a similar commitment to supporting organisations to assist and to support people living with dementia to live their best lives. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you, Gary, and apologies everyone, because IT is one of my greatest anxieties, and the phone is the only thing that's working today.
Look, thanks, Sally.
I can't see your smiling faces, but there you go.
We are smiling. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Sally, the Eden Alternative focuses on eliminating what they refer to as the 3 plagues of aging: loneliness, helplessness, and boredom. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how Eden addresses those 3 plagues, those consequences, particularly for people living with dementia, I suppose, how the Eden approach addresses those 3 and how it translates the core philosophy of person-centered care, I suppose, from a philosophy into our everyday practice, the operational practices within our organisations.
That's a really big question.
I like big questions.
I love that. So let me start with the Eden Alternative is a philosophy of person-directed care rather than person-centered care. So person-centered care, when we talk about it, it's, the description is we put the person at the centre of everything we do with them and for them. And it sounds lovely in practice, but is the person who's at the centre of the decision-making actually getting what they've requested? When we talk about person-directed care or relationship-directed care, we're really looking at the power paradigm and saying the person who's receiving the care is actually the one that's directing the way they want it delivered and when they want it delivered. It's not on the staff timetable, it's actually on the care recipient's timetable. Now, that's a huge shift. So if we think about the Eden Alternative, there's 10 principles that provide a roadmap. And Gary, you might have an image you can pop up on the screen.
And we'll pop that up on the screen right now,
Pop
Sally.
that up on the screen and I can talk to that blindly. So you've got an image there. It's got a bit like a road through the middle, a squiggly road. It's not a straight line because changing practice, there's no straightforward line. It's not I start at A and finish at B. So the 10 principles provide the roadmap for change, and the circle around it, which is the 7 domains of wellbeing, is your destination. So when we talk about eliminating loneliness, helplessness and boredom, they're principles 3, 4 and 5. The antidote to loneliness is companionship. And what we saw with COVID was the disconnect for people when they could not be with the people they loved or wanted to be with, which also fed into helplessness. Those of us living in Melbourne, the most lockdown city of the world, our claim to fame, not. There was a level of helplessness because, you were told you can't do different things. You can't go out at 8 p.m. even though nothing was open. The curfew, which drove me mad. So that's a loss of autonomy. And then that sense of boredom. So these are plagues of the spirit, and they're actually impactful for everybody, but particularly for those living with cognitive change. So if we start from the premise that we have a problem, we have people who are living with and experiencing loneliness, helplessness and boredom, the solution, which is principle 2, is about creating home or that feeling or sense of belonging. By creating that sense of belonging, you're eliminating loneliness, helplessness and boredom, which is principles 3, 4 and 5. And to do that, you're also looking at what is meaningful for people, because none of us want to do meaningless jobs or meaningless tasks in our own everyday work, let alone if I was living with a diagnosis of dementia of whatever type. Principle 7 says medicine is the servant of genuine human caring and not the master. And that's a shift in practice, because in the institutional model, we drug people first and then we ask questions later. And if you think about a person living with memory loss, often what they're trying to express is an unmet need.
Yeah.
Often it can be undiagnosed pain or unmanaged pain. And I know, Gary, when you and I were teaching together years back, you know, to hear that doctors think that people living with dementia don't experience pain was absolutely shocking.
Mm.
We are human first and foremost, regardless of any of our health conditions. Principle 8 is around empowerment. How do we empower care partner teams to support the people they're closest to, which happens to be the client or the member or the resident? Principle 9 is, you know, this is really a never-ending journey. Person-centred care, if you're doing it correctly, you don't stop. It's actually something that grows through the relationships that we have with people. And Principle 10 is around leadership, because without leadership, we're all stuffed, to be frank. But we need wise leadership, not just any old leadership. We know what bad leadership looks like, and people walk with their feet initially. But to be a good leader, you need to be accountable and to share a vision, create a vision and share a vision with people. So, you know, when you're looking at, for people living with dementia, we need to see them as human first, more than anything. That, yes, they've got a really horrible disease, but it doesn't define them. And we have some really good advocates in the sector living with dementia who are able to speak out and challenge our own misconceptions and perceptions around people living with dementia.
It's interesting, Sally, just having listened to you and to Lou describe these two models, I'm reminded of, you know, again, that's the comments we made at the very beginning, that person-centered care as a philosophy is, you ask people what they think person-centered care is, and it's often, well, we offer choice and we respect people and we value people. And what we're seeing in these models, and it can be the VIPS model from Bradford University. It can be the values model from Dementia Australia, Montessori, the Friends model, the Eden model. There are many models out there, and what they're all trying to do really is to pull out of that sort of fairly general idea of we provide person-centered care to focus on really specific things. And I think that your 10 sort of steps or points are ways in which we can get really concrete about what person-centered care or support looks like on the ground. Have you got any comments about that? And that's, I suppose, I'm looking at the relationship between the general principle of person-centered care and the Eden model, and sort of implementing those philosophies.
It's at the heart of Eden, and at the heart of all of our interactions is the relationship we have with the person who's receiving the care.
Yeah.
And if we do not, so in an institutional model, meaningful relationships are not supported. I'm here to do my job. I'm going to take your bloods or help you with ADLs. Even the language is shocking. And, you know, that's it. And I'm here to do you. I'm going to do you over. I'm using that language deliberately, and you're going to suck it up. I'm sorry to be so blunt. I can do that on a phone. But when we're talking about a person-centred or a person-directed approach, what we're asking people to think about is, this could be my future self that I'm supporting right here, right now. Is what I'm doing how I would want to be treated? And I think there's a bit of a disconnect, not deliberately, but, and I get it, you know, people in their 20s and 30s, 40s even can't imagine themselves being 80 or 90 at this point in time, but or even consider that they might be that person in that chair or that bed is just not on their radar. But we are all supporting someone who potentially could be our future self. I'm not wishing bad health on anybody.
Yeah.
But when we step into that space and we are with that person, we start to realise a whole lot of different things. One of them is, oh, that person's just like me. They like to be hugged. I like to be hugged. They don't like me shouting at them. I don't like to be shouted. All those different things. So it's really that recognition that at the heart of everything we do, there is a heart-led servant leadership approach that says, I am you and you are me. And in doing that, we actually start to shift our focus. So instead of being worried about, I've got to get this task done, it's like, how can we do this together quicker, better, with mutual respect and understanding?
Such an important point, Sally, and it picks up that that statement, and quite a controversial statement from Tom Kitwood way back in the 1990s, that personhood was something that was created and maintained in relationships, and it is the quality of the relationship. It's not the quality of the care that's provided or the support that's provided so much. Personhood is supported in relationship, as you said, and you know, something like the Eden model is a way of being really clear about what that looks like every day, and through every interaction we have with our clients or our residents. Sally, I'm going to keep chatting to you, and look again. We talk about the challenge for organisations and aged care providers in making that shift from having a philosophy of person-centred care, perhaps. Again, I'm not here to criticise aged care, but almost lip service around if we provide person-centred care. But it's the shift from aspiration to implementation of models, of person-centred models. I'm just wondering if you could share some of the strategies that you use within your teaching, with your mentoring of staff, strategies that can assist not just individual aged care staff, but the whole organisation to achieve change that's sustainable, change that lasts from day to day, from week to week, from year to year.
Well, I'm going to start with a controversial statement.
Not like you, Sally.
I've probably already said a couple, but anyway. I actually said at a conference last year that I believe that the concept of person-centred care is actually irrelevant because of people are just paying lip service and it's ticking a box. And this is not about ticking a box. This is about actually living the whole process. So one of the first questions I want people to think about as part of their change and to sustain, anything that's going on is, if I was to ask you the question, if you needed care tomorrow, would you be prepared to live where you currently work? What would your answer be? I can't see hands raised or not, whatever.
It's a powerful
But that's
question.
okay. You can, Gary, you can report back.
Yeah.
And that's our starting point, because when you are thinking about the support you're providing for someone, if it's not what you want, if you need a care, then why are you doing it? The system is broken, and we need to all be a part of the repair of that system. And the system that's broken is institutional. We don't want the institutional system. It doesn't work. It dominates people. It doesn't lead to well-being, and it's pretty soul-destroying, to be frank. So if you can't answer yes, then we all have work to do. If you can answer yes, that is fabulous. And I applaud you, and I applaud the organisation you work with. But 9 times out of 10, when I ask that question when I'm training staff, they can't answer yes. So why is it okay that we provide the services, the practice, that we practice the way we do, and expect that will be okay for this group of people, but not for us. So that's a starting point.
Yeah.
And that's a big question. It's seriously huge. And it's really about unpacking what we're doing, identifying the really good stuff we want to hang on to, and then unpacking the stuff we don't want anymore and saying, what does it look like for us? Lou mentioned earlier, and I think both of you were talking about, what does a good day look like? We actually need to answer that question for not just the care recipient, i.e. the client or the resident or member, but also for staff. What does a good day look like for staff? Because they're a part of the solution. They are not the enemy. The staff are not the enemy. So when we unpack that, we can then focus on, well, how do we do better in these different areas? And, you know, one of the focuses for us in general, not only, is really looking at minimising unnecessary medication.
Yep.
Because when you actually meet someone's unmet needs, you do not need to medicate them for control. Because quite often medication's about control. Yes, you do need to provide medication for pain relief, for example, general health conditions that need to be managed. But, you know, to medicate for an unmet need is really seriously an abuse. When Bill Thomas identified that loneliness existed, he tried to find a solution, a medical solution, to prescribe something that would eliminate loneliness. And we know that you can't do that. So when thinking about organisations, you know, it's really about the commitment of the whole of organisation. Eden is not just for activities and lifestyle people or RNs or personal care workers. The Eden alternative is for everybody, regardless of cognition. But we do find it works really, really well for people living with cognitive change because we meet them where they are. We're not trying to meet them somewhere else in our own heads. We actually try to meet them where they are. And I guess I'm going to give a plug for Cedar House in Queensland on the Gold Coast. And I visited there a couple of weeks ago. They're an Eden Registry member, happen to be part of Dementia Australia, free plug. And they've been implementing Eden for a number of years. And, you know, one of the lovely things that I saw there is when you walk in the door, you're welcomed, it feels like home, and it's a support centre for people living with dementia.
Yeah.
And it's open 5 days a week. And, you know, if I needed support, if I had a diagnosis of dementia and I needed daily support, I would be going there because the staff are stable, they know their members really well, they are collaborative in their approach, they're supportive, and the relationships are strong and they're full of love.
Yeah.
You know, fancy actually loving your members. Like, ooh, that's a bit. So that sort of falls into Kitwood's description. And they're kind. You know, we need more kindness as much as anything. So I might be digressing here.
No. I think it's really important, isn't it, that you can feel person-centered or relationship-centered care, you know, however, whichever descriptor we want to use, but you walk into a service and you can feel it as well as see it. And I think that's one of the great values of these models. Again, Montessori values, VIPs, whatever it happens to be, they're all ways of trying to make concrete what we're about, what I often will talk about, what is the work of aged care? Is it showers and pills and all of that really important? But what is at the end of the day, what is our work? What is our mission? What is our role? And I think you particularly at Cedar House, again in Queensland, we see that in action. Look, thanks, Sally. Lou, I want to turn to you if I can. If you have any other comments, particularly around that idea of how do we operationalize person-centered care? What needs to change in organisations? What support do organisations need in order to see see this change occur.
Absolutely, and great work, Sally, and reiterate everything what you have said about definitely seeing the person and not the disease. And I love the sprinkling of that word relationship. And, you know, I'm hopefully in my lifetime it changes to how do we develop this whole relationship care and that person-centered then sort of, you know, disappears, because it is about relationships, about the staff, the family, the organisations and everybody else involved. So there's I suppose a couple of things I wanted to look at is definitely that part of what wanting something very tangible within an organisation. What does it look like? How can we bed this? Because ultimately, the end result is something very intangible that you talked about. You walk in and you feel it. So how do we get there? And that's sort of a feeling which is intangible, but we need the tangible changes. And part of it is having a great driver on the seat. You know, it would be within the organisation who supports the model of care that you want to implement, whatever model of care you want to implement. We talk about the values, but the Eden, the VIPs, whatever model of care, having that driver and then really reassessing, well, if this is their home, wherever they're living, how do they want to live? How does that person want to live? And how do we as a team ensure that that happens? Is it readjusting what the task sheet needs to look like for the day? Is it looking at rescheduling people to work, you know, God forbid, a 24-hour clock for people in a different ways, and being able to sort of work in support with the families? When is it best for them to sort of come in to visit? Is at a time that they might be, it's 7 a.m., for example. So it's really looking at, for that person, how do we actually create an environment to set that person up to have a good day? What does that look like? So then maybe part of our policies and procedures need to be adjusted. How do we access that information and pass it on? And I think Sally talked about everybody sort of working together and that breaking down those silos again. How does that happen when we've got certain job position descriptions and certain roles to do? But recognising that we can work together to be able to give that outcome to that person. So what does that look like within the organisation's vision? So once again, it would be assessing the vision of the organisation. It's going into to challenge. I often talk about challenging the status quo, because as Sally said, if we don't do it, this is our future. So how can we challenge it? What does it look like? And does that sit comfortably with you? Often we do exercises with training at DA where people will go home and have a look at the values model and do a self-assessment yourself. So just think about, well, what does autonomy and your life experience look like? And then would you, once again, like to live in when you go back to work? So what is sitting the same and what is something that's different from your values to the work values, and then how you can actually embed that within the working environment. So I think it's really having that great support from management, organisation, really strong leaders that have the clarity of where you want to get to. There's no ambiguity about what does, we value people. What does that look like? So having that clear structure. So there's a way of doing it. And then how does it look like in practice within the policies, procedures that might be in the day, that the tasks that have to be get done, or the way that person's going to live, readjusting that. Yeah.
It's interesting, Luke, because I think you're talking about two parallel layers that are happening at the same time. That yes, we need person-centered staff, and that means that they need to have the skills, the knowledge, but also an aptitude for providing person-centered care. But we also need organisational change. We need policies and procedures that don't sabotage person-centered care. We need position descriptions. We need to be employing people who are working in hospitality services in the kitchen or the dining room, and person-centered support from them is built into their position descriptions. We need performance review for staff that sits down and says, well, what have you done today that values the autonomy of our residents, or that knows their life history and what's important to them. So it's those two things working parallel. I think often what happens is that there's an expectation that as staff we provide person-centered care, but then when we look at the position descriptions, or as you say, there's a task list for the day, they're running in different directions.
Well, that's absolutely, and that's where we that self-reflection, I suppose, of really looking at, well, what am I doing that creates the best outcome for that person so they can have the best day, but also for yourself.
Yeah.
And often that's when things become a bit more aligned, when it's purely not just doing everything to support that person for that outcome. It's self-reflection on what you need, what the family might need as well. And that's when that whole relationship of understanding what works just molds, and it works, and like it does at organizations that we were talking about, that it has that feeling, that magic feeling, because it's more accountable. You can be accountable with the job descriptions and what needs to be done.
Again, it's something that Sally mentioned. It's something, and I think you did as well, Lou. Person-centered care is something we see and we feel, and that makes it seem so nebulous and sort of, I don't know. It's not something we can measure. But once we have a model of care, again, Eden, VIPS, values, whatever it happens to be, we have, I hate using this language, but outcomes that we can measure. You can see where staff need support to be providing person-centered care. You can see in your policies. Yeah.
And then that's that ripple effect of, once that's seeing that and you see an outcome, there's that ripple effect that happens to other staff maybe, and within the organisation to grow. And you've got to start somewhere, and then it start off small, and then it ripples through, creating change.
Yeah. And it is that holistic thing that when we talk about in the values model, that it's not just the person living with dementia, it's staff, it's families, it's the organisation and the management, and we need to work at all of those levels in be able to succeed. Look, thanks, Lou. I see time is rushing on. Vicky, I'm just wondering. Yes,
Gary,
sorry, Sally. Yes, please do.
I just want to add to that. I think if we take a step outside of all of that really good stuff, so if organisations want to be sustainable, they need to put their model of care in their strategic plan.
Yeah.
Because that then is saying we are committed to whatever the model happens to be.
Yeah.
And that's the starting point. And, education is critical for everybody, not just the care partners, but the board members, to be a part of the solution and not just sitting out on the side. Because if they don't understand the model of care, then there's a disconnect. So that's the first thing. We have Eden Homes who have done a couple of things, and certainly around PDs, where, they've actually mandated, dare I say the word, but there's an expectation that every care partner spends 10 minutes a day with an elder or a resident or a client that is meaningful. And it can just be starting with, when the staff have their tea break, they go and find a resident and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee with them. So we start the relationship so that it's not about the transaction. It's about being together. And when you have that practice supported, then the teams can support each other. So just that in itself, definitely PDs need to be reviewed and really align themselves with what do we expect our staff to do, because I can understand the confusion, I really can, between this is my job, but this is what you want me to do. And we actually need to bring the two together. So the model becomes the way of practice, not, I'm going to do my job, then I'm going to do the model.
Yeah. It's that idea that sort of person-centered care, again, whatever language we decide to use, is almost the icing. It's what we do when we've finished the work. And I think what these models of care, once they're implemented successfully in organisations, do is flip that around. The work of aged care is about supporting people to have a good day. It's not what we do if we get time.
This is the way we do things around here.
I love that phrase.
You know, and it's not, oh, well, yeah, we used to do that, but now this is what we do. And, you know, when you work in an Eden home and staff don't know any different, when they go somewhere where there's no Eden model in place and not even a model of care of any sort, and they go, oh, my goodness, and they want to come back.
Yes, exactly.
You know, because they recognise the difference. So sometimes, you know, you've got to leave to come back and realise that where you're at is actually pretty good, and we can build on that.
Yeah.
You know, and Cedar House is a good example of where, you know, staff stabilisation is one of the reasons why they're successful. Yeah. They've got permanently assigned teams who know their people, and that's another key issue. And I get it with the workforce challenges that are global, but when we work together as a team, we actually do get better outcomes. And you know what? No one's ever died of not having a shower every day.
I think that's my favourite phrase in the whole world, Sally. Nobody ever died from not having a shower.
No.
Though, and this is something I think that Lou raised, is we sometimes have to work with families around that, because families may not, you know, if we're not bringing families along on the journey, excuse the phrase, then they can present a bit of not a barrier is not the word, but that they can resist, you know, the fact that mum hasn't had her shower today.
Well, they need education as well.
Exactly.
They need education, and they need to be a part of the relationship you have with the care recipient. They are part of your, you know, cheer squad.
Yep.
And when they're invited in, you get less issues than when they're not invited in, because they feel like everything's stopped at the front door.
Yeah, exactly. Now, look, I wanted to throw to some questions. Thanks, Sally. That's some really important. Again, we could discuss this all day. Vicky, do we have any questions from our audience, please?
We have some great questions from our audience today. I've got one here for you. Are there any tools available for aged care providers to measure the effectiveness of models of care?
I'm going to throw to Lou. Sally, I'll throw to Lou first, and then I'll come back to you. So tools, and the really, really interesting question, isn't it? How do we measure the effectiveness of what we do?
Absolutely. And there's a couple of different tools that you can do, and there's some self-reflection tools that under the Montessori philosophy too. So there's some tools, and we'll be able to share you some links, I think, on that to have a look at, to be able to sort of see what you're doing. And a lot of it with that is what's working, what's not working, and then now what. So it helps with accountability and to recognise the gaps. So with that, and then there's some clinical sort of data tools that you can measure from once implementation of a certain model of care. The values model, for instance, has been implemented in some organisations in some different settings, and that has been measured from outcomes of being able to look at what was happening before and what is happening after that. So there's definitely some measurable tools of being able to have a look at, and that often was from changes within policies that were embedded, new policies implemented, new strategies, things of being able to engagement. So there were measurable tools of how do you know if someone is more engaged? How do you know if the family is more engaged? So they're the tools that we measure to be able to see, well, was a model of care effective? And once again, don't really like using that word success. It's more about what was effective for that person. Did they, I suppose, get to where they wanted to get to? And that's seeing the person, and that could have been, you know, on a daily basis. It could be at the end of the week, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that sometimes they're almost side measures, measurements of the use of antipsychotic medications before we introduced a model of care and after, the falls rates, the lists of complaints from families, staff turnover. They're indirect measures in some ways, but in other ways they are actually measuring the impact of these models.
Well,
Sally,
that's right. It's having that.
oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
No, that's good. Just having all those assessment tools, of those measurable tools before anything, because
Yes.
often you don't see things happening, or you don't think anything's happened
Yeah.
until it's been documented or measured before, and then post developing a model of care, then there's often those subtle changes of engagement, of people sleeping better, eating better, families being more involved. It's a bit of a ripple that happens once it goes.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lou. Sally, your perspective on that question?
We, as part of our Eden registry process, which is looking at best practice and how we're shifting from where we were, ground zero, let's measure ground zero, to what are the opportunities to build. We have a cultural assessment survey that our registry members review in conjunction with other staff members and or residents and clients, because it looks at the staff, it looks at organisation, and it looks at the resident or the client. And what are the things we're doing? Do we do these things all the time, or very rarely, or never at all? So it's really looking at challenging our thinking as much as anything, and then our practice, and then create an action plan that says these are the things we need to focus on. So we use that as part of our registry process, and we also have wellbeing surveys, and certainly our registry members say they survey fairly frequently, and they look at, one of the questions that looks at the three plagues of loneliness, helplessness, and boredom is, for residents or clients, is, do you ever feel lonely? And rate it yourself. What about bored? What about helpless? So, thinking about some of those terms that you can start to measure, and then what would, the counter question to that would be, well, to make you feel less lonely, what would you like to see or happen or experience? So I think some of the surveys are too rigid and very institutional. But we're talking about humans and relationships. So how do you measure that? And that's really the warmth of, and that's an intangible. We're not measuring, did they do this? It's like, how do you feel when you live here or work here?
There's subjective, perhaps, rather than objective measures.
They are, but it's certainly, when someone tells you constantly, I have nothing to do, then we're missing the point, aren't we? Because what we're missing is we actually haven't got to know that person well enough. And it disturbs me when staff will say, oh, yeah, we know our residents. Do you? Really? I'm not sure that we do.
Yeah.
We know them superficially.
Yeah. And how do we use that knowledge of the resident to structure the support that we provide, I think, is the question. Look, I know certainly at Dementia Australia in the past we've used some really old and quite validated tools of dementia care mapping. It's not a technique that's used a great deal these days. It's fairly time consuming, but you can get that sort of objective measures of connections between people and disengagement and joy and happiness and those sorts of things. So there certainly are tools out there.
Yeah. If you use the Eden domains of wellbeing and you think of each domain as a glass, full or empty, when you're looking at someone with an unmet need, you say someone's at the door wanting to get out, right? We see that often for some people. Which of the domains are they expressing? They're expressing security and autonomy and minimum. So at the moment, their domain of security is through the floor, generally. So how do we then build that, fill that glass up so that they feel more secure? What is happening for this person at a particular time of the day? Is this a regular daily event, e.g. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they've just heard the school bell and they're expecting their children to come home? Or I've got to be at home because my children are coming home. It's about knowing their story. And that's beyond the care plan. It's actually over and above. and it's separate, but it should be integrated. But it's all those bits of information that people have in their heads that we don't write down and we don't share.
Absolutely.
We need to get that out.
Yeah, and yeah, bring it into the heart of things. Vicky, one more question I think we probably can squeeze in.
Goodness. Okay, I've got one here. I think that the Eden model and others do offer value to our elderly residents, particularly those experiencing cognitive impairments. How do us healthcare workers make meaningful and ongoing changes in an environment that oftentimes seems to favour profit over patient-centred care?
Oh, that's we need another hour for that one. Look, I think can I provide my answer? In some ways, that's what we're trying to discuss today. Really, is that it's that idea that staff need to need to have education and they need skills and they need knowledge, but it's also an organisation-wide thing. It's not. I think it's very difficult for a lone staff member to change. It's difficult. It's impossible to change the culture. And I'll shut up at that point. And throw to Lou. What would you say to that?
Yes, I can hear Sally laughing there, so I know that you're eager to sort of say something, but I think we're all on the same page there. And also I will be, to say that thank you for your comment, because it's definitely is a challenge when you see it's a business. For many people, it's a business, so it's really hard when who's paying for the service and what are they looking for. So I think part of it is really looking at the organisation's own values, what is important to them, and if it is driven by different means, then that's something that probably needs to be questioned, and really going back to the reality of why you're really there, and for the staff and the residents and the families to look at, well, what, how do we want to live? What's important to the person, not even just for the business, financial, for the resident, for their clinical needs, but come back to what is important to, and it really rethinks, I think, the questioning of what are we doing here and why are we doing it. So, but it's not easy. There are some challenges that can be faced. Sally.
Yes, I agree with all of that and then some. And I think, if we really actively ask our residents what they would like to have happen, that's a big shift. And you can start to challenge the organisation. And, just one thing that you could do, we all need to become disruptors. So one thing I'd get you to do is to give the remote back to the residents or the clients. So they're in charge of the TV and all the music, not the staff. Yeah. And trust me, that's a power dynamic. It's very challenging. But you can be a disruptor in your own way, and you're also culture keepers. So if the culture you have now is not what you want, then together we can all achieve more.
It's that thing. It's what we say all the time, isn't it? In dementia support, that small changes make big differences, and even just seeing that shift from who controls the remote in the lounge room. Again, that's part of that feel for are we successful in implementing person-centred care. Look, I'm aware that we've only got 2 minutes to go, so we might wind it up there. Look, can I thank Lou and Sally particularly for coming to us under trying technical experience. I think we've only just opened the conversation about the idea of person-centred, relationship-centred models of care. I think we've raised a little bit of some of the challenges that it's not just about individual staff members being person-centred. It's, we often talk or say that it's almost impossible for staff to provide person-centred care if we don't have person-centred organisations. And that goes down to the nitty-gritty of policies and procedures and position descriptions and all, you know, how are we recruiting and what are we recruiting for, and all of those things are challenging, and you know, and I love your word, Sally, disruptive. They're disruptive to organisations, and it can be painful sometimes as well, but the results are really worth it. And I recommend to everybody, there are lots of models available out there. There are organisations like Dementia Australia and the Eden Alternative that can provide support for organisations who are wanting to move down this.
Thank you, Gary.
Oh, sorry, I disappeared there for a moment. So look, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody in the background who's made this possible today. We look forward to seeing you hopefully in December, which will be the last webinar. I can't believe I'm saying this, but the last webinar for 2025 before we head into the next year. So thank you all. Thank you for your questions. Have a great day.